Howdy everyone, Rabbit of ScrubLeet Academy here. I'd like to talk about something I've taken to calling the practice of culturally renowned predation in video games, and how the embracing of such a practice has led, and will definitely continue to lead to, unsavory conditions in the games market as a whole. Less than a week ago, I uploaded a video entitled, "Now that the Isle of Dread is out, should you get it?" in response to a few comments I had noticed others making about Dungeons & Dragons Online's newest expansion, Isle of Dread, and some commentary by a streamer named StreamTom, who is easily the most entertaining and one of the most prolific Dido streamers at current. This video is in no way meant to disparage StreamTom, though I pretty much disagreed with or rejected everything he had to say in his own video, linked below. No, the chain of events that led to the publication of this video is actually kind of a weird train of thought to follow, but I'll attempt to summarize as best I can. I felt that StreamTom's video could be construed as misleading, that it didn't actually tackle what I look for in a game, and that his sneak peek didn't fill in enough of the blanks for me to warrant its existence. Once again, that's an opinion of mine, not an assertion of fact. For many, I'm sure it was sufficient, but to me, it lacked the transparency I want in games. That's what led to me commenting on his video, and where I noticed this phenomenon. So I had a discussion with somebody on this video, and one thing I learned from that discussion, though, is that Dido is not free of its own community's renown for its business model, which does have pay-to-win elements in it. Dido went free-to-play in 2009, adopting the model as a means of survival, but it's since kept on that path, taking on the practice with more enthusiasm in recent years. In my comment chain, the person I spoke to, who I'll leave nameless since I did not get permission to use their name in this video, mentioned that a certain item in the Dido shop, namely the autos boxes, were valuable enough to warrant purchase of high-costing tiers of the Isle of Dread expansion that are available for sale. The notion of collectors and ultimate bundles as tacked-on purchase options in video games is conspicuous enough, but the idea that the pricing model of a game is always indicative of the value of those commodities purchased is ludicrous, given the lack of oversight the games industry seems to have compared to so many other industries. A close breakdown of the prices in my own video delineates exactly how much value each of these auto boxes would actually have in the context of Dido's own market. In the context of an actual, tangible market, of course, the value of anything in a digital game as a service would effectively be worth the higher of nothing, or its subjective value to the consumer, then nothing when the server shut down. To put it more clearly, the autos boxes aren't even worth the value Standing Stone Games, the studio that operates Dido, places upon them. Also, it's arguable that their relative cost to other similar items from the games market is significantly higher for the value gained in-game, considering that Dido's gaming model requires constant leveling rather than participation in a robust endgame, which is not all that common for MMORPGs. Also, their value is entirely subjective, since no tangible product has actually reached the consumer, and every facet of value depends entirely on the state of the server, something that is explicitly outside of the consumer's effective control. I do want to clarify that despite Dido's explicit mobile gaming marketing strategy, and despite it being a PC game, the autos boxes I'm talking about are not loot boxes. You know exactly what it is that you get in an autos box. The problem arises when you break down the value of those items in the box and realize that you're paying the effective value of $14 more than the actual value of the items in that box individually. It's perhaps likely that the math simply never crosses the minds of people who want to purchase these things, or that they don't really understand what the tangible value of these items is, or what the industry standards would be for similar purchases. But that actually is part of the problem and leads us to an extrapolated version of the same argument. Diablo Immortal, which has been making headlines and blowing up YouTube all month in my perception alone, is a good example of when this goes out of control. The notion of being an exploitative game has been well established by countless journalists, streamers, content creators of all stripes. Its whole marketing strategy is corrupt, from the extensive obfuscation of its in-game currencies and how those relate to real-world money spent, to the constant calls to visit the store, to the many flashy deals that just beg you to buy them. But there are still those who defend it adamantly from the perspective of being a consumer-friendly game.
You can lock the phone up so that where they cannot spend one dime on mobile games.
No, if there's such a big problem, then taking the thing away shouldn't solve the problem, because the problem exists with the individual, and it could exist with the product. And once more, This has been explored in countless ways, even to the point that extremely popular YouTubers like Asmongold intentionally spend money in order to analyze these disdainful business strategies.
All right, guys. So let's see. We've already spent. Give me a second. We already spent. So it's going to be $30, and then plus the $15. So right now we're at $46 spent on the game. Okay, so we need to get more of these jewels though, because we can't buy these yet.
Regardless of the damage control Activision Blizzard attempts to promote in ways such as their promotion of Diablo 4, which was unusually bereft of clarity regarding potential pay-to-win elements, the vitriol surrounding Diablo Immortal dominates the web, and it's well earned. This is an example of dropping the frog in a pot of boiling water. They tried manipulating people a little too obviously, and that caused a backlash. And that's what I mean when I talk about culturally renowned predation. The idea that something is bad for the consumer can be made subjective itself, because if the society deems it annoying, but not bad enough to warrant action, it can gradually slip under the radar, growing more and more perverse with each turned head, with each nonchalant payment, until people have come to simply accept its presence and even defend it. It's to the point that Disney, likely due to the absolutely shameless and pathetic virtue signaling in Lightyear, has released their own mobile game called Disney Mirrorverse in order to cash in on this market, and it's a game that contains paid microtransactions. And I will not pretend that Dido doesn't have its issues. Its pricing is very similar to many mobile titles, but I think a key difference is that Dido doesn't tend to sell gambling mechanics, and its store tends to sit in the background rather than jump into the foreground with every completed dungeon, like some other game titles. It's gloom-inducing that is praiseworthy in the gaming industry today, but it gives me some hope. The practice of culturally renowned predation is a phenomenon that can both positively and negatively reinforce certain cultural behaviors in a society depending on what kinds of behaviors are sought by the practitioners. Also, it's rarely ever isolated. The culture at large has adjusted significantly to one more embracing of video games, and in particular the tactics games publishers tend to use in order to blur the lines between savory and unsavory practices. These practices are actually a procedure. They require a cultural embrace of some idea or ideal, which companies then pander to in order to make sales, which leads to further cultural interpretation, further discussion, and a constant shift. The cycle will go on. Now, this cycle isn't always a problem. Change is not always a problem, it's just when change becomes predatory to the consumer. This is only one example, one tactic, but it certainly works for all intents and purposes, and it employs the main strategy that games publishers have seen work for a while now: obfuscation. By masquerading the predatory practices as something benevolent and beneficial to the customer, companies that have employed this tactic have found ways to gain a plethora of allies, whom they then squeeze in order to harvest that sweet whale milk. For example, the notion of a free-to-play game needing to make money to produce content, of course stated as using purely cosmetic sales, is a common argument that I see that leads to pay-to-win mechanics and gambling simulation being used in video games. Diablo Immortal is one of the more recent and actually one of the most blatant versions of this same strategy, but I'll get into that in a bit. So it's the idea of culturally renowned predation that holds weight here, that the subtle influencing of a population can have remarkable effects on its ability to accept that which it would otherwise obviously reject under direct assault. America's obstinacy regarding lead-based paint, despite obvious research even as early as 1904 showing that lead poisoning existed and was directly linked to the use of lead paint, is a good example of how negative reinforcement from an industry can manipulate a population and cause it extreme harm. The games industry is a positively reinforced version of the same, offering the public excuses such as the much-loved ideas that games take significantly more money and time to produce than they used to, that they're not going to use the same predatory tactics they or other companies have used in the past, and that supporting a games company is the same as supporting the developers within that company, all of which can result in these buggy, unfinished messes with no culpability that are thrown at people on release day. The culture's embracing of these products, for one reason or another, and particularly their desire to fight to preserve these products that are harmful to their own best interests, as well as detrimental to the industry as a whole, allows predatory companies to take advantage of people in order to sell their products, no matter how shoddy the quality is compared to what is expected. The amount of money to be made on shoddy mobile titles is frankly astonishing. But much like the various currency systems in place meant to confuse the consumer and distance the money they spend on a game from the actual value their money has brought them, games companies will play into the complex, excuse-driven narratives meant to defend the company from criticism by jaded gamers and third-party bystanders. Basically, by convincing the consumer that these practices are not predatory but friendly, and that free-to-play is not a red flag but a white one, games publishers are able to effect change that is in their best interest to the direct detriment of the consumer. As long as the game performs to the minimum requisite standards afforded to any product, the intrinsic ability to function roughly as advertised sometime after release, they avoid legal trouble at the same time. To me, that sounds like a vague, shady responsibility, and it most certainly is. The prevalence of day one patches alone speaks to an industry of broken products and rush deadlines, and some individuals' readier acceptance that a game product just isn't meant to release in a finished state anymore should be a huge red flag by itself. It's this kind of content that brings me back to my original point, and that makes me dwell on the idea of a culture's appreciation of this kind of marketing tactic. I feel like a clip from this video will help shine a light on what games publishers think of you when they employ these strategies.
If we tell people they are a certain way, if we compliment them on being nice, good citizens, they are more likely to behave as nice, good citizens. So you should actually tell your players that they are generous individuals who have a taste for good art and want to support their game developers by paying you and buying IAPs.
If you feel that I'm being disingenuous with the use of that clip, I urge you to view the video in full. It is not taken out of context, I assure you. That is the context. But the response from consumers is simple. If you don't like it, don't pay for it. The problem arises not because of, say, Dave's abstention from consuming the kind of content that we've got now, but from Mark's meek acceptance of it. Dave didn't participate in the decision, but with Mark's money, the company can afford to make another title like that one. Now imagine if there are 1 million Marks, each one paying at least $5, with 1,000 of them paying several $1,000s. Dave won't be able to keep up, so he quits. But his quitting did nothing to solve the problem. The company doesn't need Dave anymore. It has 1 million Marks. Then another company starts doing what the first one did, because the money is quite literally unreal, and another, and another. This is not a slippery slope fallacy. This is the state of the gaming industry today. This has already happened. It is already happening. Abstention from the process, instead of speaking and acting against it, allows the process to leave you behind and take advantage of others who are busy attempting to remind people that they do not need to participate in it. Their games will be fine, except, no, they won't. Societies are exceedingly complex entities, entwined entirely, and removing oneself from that entity will enact no change, stop no level of predation, and protect nobody who is vulnerable to these kinds of shady business practices. Some people mention that we should bring this to the attention of world governments, and to them I say, I'd like to tell you a story. It begins well before World War II, with President Roosevelt issuing an executive order, which we'll call Executive Order 9066. EO 9066 allows the government to convert many areas of western USA into military zones, effectively letting them evict the citizens of those areas. Unfortunately, the government chooses to twist the order they just signed, granting housing and minimum wage jobs to the evicted peoples, while they live in the relocation camps offering sanctuary for displaced members of those groups. This includes a lot of Asian Americans after the war against Japan begins. The American sentiment towards Asian American peoples at the time is so unfavorable, the bill is put into effect after a grand total of an hour and a half of deliberation. If this is sounding pretty harsh and concentration campy, it's because it fucking is. The only difference is it wasn't allowed to go that far, since the Supreme Court stepped in 2 years later and said this is unconstitutional. And here's my question to you. Do you trust your Supreme Court to do the same today? Hell, I wouldn't have trusted them to do it in 1944, but somehow people just keep surprising me. That is actually the solution that a government can bring into effect to try to solve a social issue. And this kind of prejudice against Asian Americans isn't a mystery looking back. People tend to forget about it now. But they enlisted the government to deal with a problem that required a screwdriver, and the government dropped a B-52 bomber payload. Most world governments have the emotional and intellectual tact of a bull whose nuts just got slapped by a whip. No government will help you solve this problem because it's not a problem especially needing government intervention. It is a problem entirely caused by consumer interests, which are unusually working against the consumer's best interest. The gambling scene of loot boxes is different in intent. Diablo Immortal's legendary gem system is an example of random number generation you can pay for with real money, so that would count under the metric of gambling. Cosmetics that provide no in-game benefit are obnoxious, and admittedly do actually devalue the cosmetic items in-game, but unfortunately I think that ship has pretty much sailed. That being said, the solution is not and rarely ever will be government intervention. William Godwin, the founder of anarchism and a major proponent of governmental limitation, said that whenever government assumes to deliver us from the trouble of thinking for ourselves, the only consequences it produces are those of torpor and imbecility. Regulation would likely solve this problem, but the problems it brings with it would be unsolvable. The solution entirely revolves around what we as consumers are willing to put up with. People have grown acclimatized to this model of gaming, especially when the title is one they would otherwise want to pay for. These games publishers are not looking out for what is in your best interest, a point for which the methods of digital predation I mentioned already stand as evidence. They may not even be looking at you as the target of their marketing. They are looking to make money, plain and simple, and sometimes that doesn't require you. The profit motive is their incentive, and any drastic alterations to the standard operating procedure should be seen through the lens of the profit motive. The game's market is not going free to play largely because it suddenly loves the consumer. It's doing so because the profits are astronomically greater in the free-to-play model than the previous subscription models of games as a service, or the classic transaction of content for money, which at this point seems even weird to think about. That this kind of transition to the free-to-play model is predatory doesn't affect their moral decision-making. Or, as mentioned in the CEO gaming exploitation video,
some of you will probably be slightly shocked by all the tricks I have listed here, but I'll leave the morality of it out of the talk. We can discuss it if we have time later. So, let's dive right in.
In my opinion, and as my last words, I would implore anyone who is considering spending money to think carefully about where your money is going. If what you want is cosmetic in nature, remember that the value of every 0 and 1 you just bought entirely depends on that game not shutting down arbitrarily when they realize they've pretty much gotten all they can from you. Star Wars Commander is a perfect example of this, having shut down in June of 2020 with the explicit message that they would not offer refunds. Thankfully, some content creators promoted this idea and gave a bit of insight to people about Zynga, the company that took over Star Wars Commander, which did not have the power they needed to make that claim.
So Zynga, although Zynga said they will not be issuing refunds, Google and Apple will have to issue refunds and then get their money back from these guys, because it's unfair. And for those of you who experienced the same problem with Force Arena, most of you did apply for refunds, and those of you I know did manage to get that money back. So it's a process that they're familiar with. It's a process you're going to be doing, because this has come out of the blue. Let's face it. If you purchased money yesterday on this game, bought some things, and then suddenly you get this announcement, that is not fair. And to give you the luxury, in their opinion, of playing it until June the 12th, to waste your credits on stuff in the game, what's the point? The game's going to be closed down. There's nothing to play. Sadness, really.
I actually made purchases in this game and played it extensively, and I was around for its final 3 months. Zynga's profit margin for Star Wars Commander was not shabby either, but the quality of the game dipped considerably, and the projected amount of money that would be gained from Star Wars Commander dipped. This is an example of a gaming community making promises, but always keeping its eye on the profit margin. To me, supporting companies has long ago become an obsolete exercise. Pretty much every studio that had respect in my eyes has lost it. Bethesda with Fallout 76, CD Projekt Red with its botched and suspiciously media blacked out Cyberpunk release, which you can review in amazing depth on Upper Echelon's channel linked in the description, and Blizzard with its basically everything, because it has a scandal a week now. And if you were to ask me if I recommend you support any developer at this point, simply by the nature of their status as that developer, I would have to tell you no to maintain any sort of honest integrity. Support projects if you wish, but take the time to inform yourself of what those projects offer you as a consumer. And above all else, do not bother with pre-orders. That said, the ones to watch out for the most are those that attempt to entice or trick you into believing in the benignity of their actions, that your purchase gives you significant value and also helps out a company that appreciates you, and that they promise only to monetize a game in such and such a way. My trust for these companies has waned, and admittedly, I feel like yours should too if you want the games industry to get back to earning its once proud reputation. Thank you to everybody for watching through to this point. Please support me by subscribing to this channel, commenting, liking this video, and sharing it across all platforms. If you feel I spoke in error at any point, please feel free to mention that and we can have a friendly discussion in the comments. I'm very approachable. That said, I'ma get up out of here. Do take care, thank you again, and have a wonderful day.